This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of The Great McGonagall, Sufficiently Remarkable, and the Boston Metaphysical Society. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and we're two guys with advanced degrees talking about webcomics.
And on the March webcomics episode, Sean and I are going to discuss two current ongoing and one completed webcomic. We're going to begin with Roger Langridge's The Great McGonagall, which actually is a very new webcomic beginning back in January of this year. After that, we're going to look at Maki Naro's Sufficiently Remarkable. And then we're going to wrap up with the completed webcomic, Boston Metaphysical Society, written by Madeline Holly Rossing with art by Emily Hugh. But before we get into that conversation, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be anywhere from 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some amazing, colossal specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off the cover price, sometimes 50% off of the cover, but many times you can find discounts that are more impressive than that.
And we'd be remiss if we don't mention their sister site, mydigitalcomics.com. If you prefer your comics in an electronic format, we are talking about webcomics here after all, head over to mydigitalcomics.com to pick up your digital comics there. They have tons of books available in a lot of your favorite publishers, both PDF and CBZ formats, and they're all DRM free. That's a big selling point for me personally. And 5% of your purchases at mydigitalcomics.com also count towards your DCBS purchases. So you get kind of a double bonus there just for buying your comics electronically.
Yeah. So whether you go with their digital or hard copy offerings, you can't go wrong using the services of Discount Comic Book Service and their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com. So go to dcbservice.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your material there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Sean and Derek sent you. Well, Sean, how are things going with you?
Going pretty well. The year is flying by, though. It's another one of those where came to the end of February and realized, oh, hey, we've got a March show to record here soon. We should probably do that.
That's right. Yeah, we're almost halfway through March. And in fact, my spring break at UT Dallas is basically going on now. It's all next week is the break.
Oh, that'll just be a good minute to catch up then, catch your breath.
Right.
I could use that too. I don't have a spring break though.
No, unfortunately.
That's all right. We'll keep going.
Well, one thing we can do in terms of keeping on going is, before we get to our discussion of this month's webcomic, share some listener mail we received that actually is a response to some of the things we discussed in the February webcomic show.
Mail time. Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
Now, if you remember, one of the webcomics we looked at was Chris Ware's The Last Saturday, and you and I had speculated about what Ware may have had planned for this, if this was definitely going to be only a webcomic, or if he will eventually publish this in print form in some way. In other words, you and I, as much as we enjoyed that webcomic, we didn't know much about its context, right?
Right.
One of our listeners, Keith Ellis, actually did know a little bit about The Last Saturday, and he sent us a couple of emails about this. His first one starts off, "Hello, just wanted to drop a line to comment on your recent episode regarding Chris Ware's The Last Saturday webcomic. I was fortunate enough to attend a panel on comic book storytelling that featured Chris Ware at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I took the opportunity to participate in a small Q&A session afterwards. I tentatively stepped up to the microphone and told Mr. Ware how much I enjoyed his webcomic and if it was going to be published in a book. He seemed totally puzzled by the question, and it eventually came out that he never even knew it was published on the internet. He assumed it was only going to go into the print edition, and was totally unaware that he had done a webcomic. He also sheepishly and confusingly admitted that the whole strip was, quote," this is in the email, a quote, "just kind of a joke, a long joke that turned out to not have a punchline," unquote, and never addressed it in becoming a book. He seemed kind of embarrassed about the whole thing. I really enjoyed the strip myself, and I'm a huge fan of Chris Ware, so it was disappointing to hear him kind of disparage his work. He is quite modest, almost to a fault. And then he concludes, "Being a Chris Ware fan is, unfortunately, a lot like being an Alan Moore fan. You have to wait for years for the new stuff to come out, but we're willing to wait because the quality of the product is so damned high. Thanks, Keith."
And we appreciate that message, Keith. That puts a lot of light on just that whole situation. And it makes for an interesting discussion in and of itself too, in that, that Ware was creating this comic not knowing how it was going to be used, and not, he was basically commissioned to put this thing together. And like Keith said, it was totally unaware that it was going to be online in any capacity.
Which strikes me as very weird, given the fact that Chris Ware is really known for his abilities at design and the control over that. So I would think that knowing whether this was going to be an online comic or a web comic or not would be critical information to have when it comes to the actual writing or the design of this webcomic, The Last Saturday. That's just unusual that he didn't know originally that it was going to be a webcomic and then felt a little embarrassed about that.
Yeah, I half wonder if the contracts when they were signed originally, if there's a clause in there that says we can use this, we can publish this in any way we want, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time they hadn't actually considered putting it online, and maybe that was a after the fact decision that somebody said, "Oh, hey, you know what? We're getting this great work from Chris Ware. We've got the website. We might as well put it up over there too." It's entirely possible that was a decision that was made after Ware had completed the comic in its entirety.
Yeah, I wonder at what point the Guardian contacted, or at what point in the story did the Guardian contact him about a potential contribution? I don't know.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
But we definitely appreciate Keith's insights and some of his recollections from that Q&A that took place after the event at the Art Institute of Chicago a few years ago.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sean, let's jump into this month's webcomics, and we're going to begin with a very, very young one, and this is The Great McGonagall, written and drawn by Roger Langridge. Now, are you a Roger Langridge fan?
It's hard not to be. The man is a very talented creator, and everything I've seen him, I haven't read everything that he's done, but everything I have seen has been very enjoyable. Yeah.
I think I first came to his work through Fred the Clown, and then from there I kind of, branched out and started to look at some of his other stuff. Now, I haven't read a lot of the Muppet Show comics that he's done, but I know that that's one of the things that he's, I guess, most recently really known for, because that was a fairly long run with the Muppet Show comics, I think from 2009 to 2012.
Right, yeah. What I always liked about Langridge as obviously, I mean, he's a very talented cartoonist, and just in terms of his illustration ability, it has a very comic style to it. But on top of that, he's still very talented with his storytelling and his wordplay, and he's very conscious of getting the tone right for the type of story he's trying to tell. Right? Those Muppet stories had a very different feel. They felt very Muppet-ish, right? Mm-hmm. But it was a very different feel from, say, Fred the Clown or, any of the other pieces that he's done. He did another series, I think it was before the Muppets, but not too much before the Muppets, called Snarked.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That was kind of a take off of the work of Lewis Carroll. And that felt very different. That had a very Lewis Carroll kind of feel to it versus something like the Muppets, versus something like Fred the Clown. So he's very good at adapting his style of humor to whatever story he's trying to tell.
Yeah. And in fact, I guess one of his most recent things that we actually did discuss on the regular episode of the Comics Alternative is the collaboration he did with friend of the show, Andy Hirsch, Baker Street Peculiars. That was, I think, a 4-issue series from Boom Studios. And we reviewed the first issue of that miniseries. And then last year, in an interview that Kunka and I conducted with Andy Hirsch, we asked him briefly about his work with Langridge and Baker Street Peculiars. Okay. Yeah.
I missed that episode. I'll have to go back and check that out.
Yep. Yeah, definitely check that out. But let's get back to the matter at hand, which is Langridge's new webcomic, The Great McGonagall. And I guess the subtitle on this, according to the very first page on this webcomic, is The Worst Poet in the World.
Yeah, and that is not actually something that even Langridge took upon himself to do.
Exactly.
Because I did not realize this until after reading the comic, but this William McGonagall was a real historical figure, and he is generally considered to be the worst poet in the world. Yes. And was just so oblivious to how bad he was that he kept doing his poetry and kept presenting it and doing it at shows and whatever. And everybody just thought it was absolute garbage.
Yeah. Well, okay. Make sure that you get his full name, because it is William Topaz McGonagall.
Well, and if we're going that route, then we should bring in his full title too, right? It's wait a minute. Let me look this up here. Sir William Topaz McGonagall, Knight of the White Elephant, Burma. It's part of the comedy that comes with Langridge in general, but the brilliance of it is this isn't stuff he's making up either. This is based all on historical facts. Like I said, there's an actual William McGonagall in history who was just that oblivious.
Yeah, and if our listeners want to, double check with what we're saying here, check on Wikipedia, and William McGonagall has his own Wikipedia page. I mean, there's an entry there that actually provides quite a bit of information. I was really surprised for this guy to be, by any measure, kind of a joke. And a curiosity when it comes to literary history. There's quite a bit of information out there on him. And in fact, as Roger Langridge points out, and as apparently is the case, it is a historical fact that since the time that he was actually alive in creating poetry, and also he's an actor as well, or at least attempted to be, that people were making fun of them. His work, that, the quality of it is just awful. So, and then the cherry on top of that is the fact that apparently McGonagall was never aware that people were making fun of him, that whenever they were being sarcastic or snarky, he was taking it literally. He was taking whatever comments he got as praise. And Langridge points this out quite prominently throughout the webcomic, or at least the webcomic that we have so far.
Yeah. Well, and he starts off, in case you're not aware of this McGonagall person in the first place, he starts off with, I think it was about 3 pages of just kind of an overview. right? And says, basically this is a real guy. He was really bad at poetry. He was a really bad actor. He didn't know how bad he was. People made fun of him, and he just took it in stride and thought they were still praising him. And there's this kind of 3-page summary before it gets into the comic proper itself, right? So there's all this background. So you don't need to go to the Wikipedia page necessarily to read all about this, but there's obviously a lot more information there if you're interested.
Right, exactly. And what you've just mentioned is basically the structure of this webcomic that we have so far. As we mentioned, this began in January of this year, so it hasn't been around for that long. And so far, there are 15 pages of webcomic available. The very first one is, I guess you could call it the book cover. And then the aforementioned 3-page synopsis of, who McGonagall actually was. And then after that, we have, I guess, the first 2 stories that basically go into detail much more than the information we get within those first 3 pages. And so I think that was a smart way to begin this webcomic after that very first cover page with the 3-page summary, which gives just some brief, the high points of his career. And, depending on how you define career.
Yeah, well, I was going to say how you define high points too.
High point. Yeah, that's right. And then we get the first 2 stories. The first one is called The Great McGonagall, The True Heir. And then that's 2 or 3 pages. And then the longer one that follows is McGonagall, The Great McGonagall, the worst poet in the world. And I don't know if that has a title, but this takes place in Dundee, 1880. And this is basically the story of, oh God, what was the gentleman's name? Busical, who... Oh, yeah, who was going to become a patron of his, but that turned out to be a big hoax. And without giving anything away, quite a number of pages is spent on this hoax, just to show you about McGonagall's inability to sense the reality around him and how easily he's taken in. And much of the reason why he's so taken in is he's so self-centered that his gaze out into the world of others isn't that acute. So because he
that's an understatement.
Yes. So because of he thinks of himself and his work as so important, he doesn't see that the people around him are either making fun of him or trying to take advantage of him.
Yeah, and it's almost amazing how much this real person is almost a character developed specifically for Langridge to write about.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's very much like I mentioned before. He kind of has Langridge has this kind of mutable style of humor and can do different types of humor very well. But it has this element of McGonagall himself, his real life, has this element of slapstick, has this element of wordplay, nuanced meanings that just go flying over somebody's head. Double entendres, there's all this stuff going on that McGonagall is just completely oblivious to. And it almost seems like a vaudeville character or caricature, I should say, when in fact it really isn't. And what Langridge is presenting, even though it's a flat out comedy, right? It's a very comedic piece, as many of Langridge's works are. But it's historical fiction. I mean, it's basically what really happened, maybe with some dialogue changed or modified or whatever. But that's one of the amazing things to me about this story is that it's so funny, so amusing in that Langridge style. If you like Langridge's stuff from any of his other work, you'll certainly enjoy this. But it's just like I said, this character, this person is ready-made for Langridge to take advantage of and just write a story about. Yeah,
completely outside of the comics medium, you could call William McGonagall a cartoon figure.
Oh, absolutely.
He's a cartoon, which makes all the sense now that Langridge uses him in this new webcomic. So he makes a cartoon out of someone who's already a cartoon.
Yeah. There's a handful of figures that pop up throughout history that are like this. There's McGonagall here. There was an emperor of the United States that lived in San Francisco around the early 1900s, I think. And that was just, some guy who walked around San Francisco, was homeless most of the time, and claimed he was the emperor of the United States. And everybody just kind of treated him as like the local mascot or something, and there's these handful of figures like that. I'd be fascinated to see, Langridge or somebody of his caliber tackling like this whole series of figures like that. I think that'd be hilarious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you were talking earlier about Langridge's style, and for those of our listeners who may not have experienced any of Langridge's comics, which is unfortunate, definitely go out and seek them out. He has usually a kind of, and I mean this in a good way, kind of a cartoony style. In other words, it's a little more, it's detailed art, so it's not minimalist, but it's more on the iconic side and less on the more photorealistic side. So his characters definitely come across, his art lends itself to the kind of humor he usually writes about. And that definitely works to the benefit of the content of this historical narrative or narratives that he's telling here about the life of William McGonagall. But we get to see other examples of Langridge's art. And in particular, I'm thinking of the very first page of that 3-page synopsis that you mentioned earlier. And when we are first introduced to McGonagall and get, his date of birth and his death and where he was from and all of that, there's a portrait of McGonagall that is much more detailed and much more realistically drawn than the kind of art that we're used to seeing from Langridge.
Yeah, it's an excellent portrait. It's like, something that you would see almost as like accompanying a Wall Street Journal article or something, right? Mm-hmm. Well, almost at that level. But he does that for the one panel, that one image, and then goes straight into a more traditional comic style, a cartoony style, and it works. It works very well. He's done that style, this kind of cartoony style, for years and years and years. If you're familiar with Langridge at all, you're familiar with this style, and it just suits the story very well. Mm-hmm. It suits the story very well, I think.
Yeah.
But I like that he starts with this kind of more straight traditional illustration to say, look here, this is a real guy. Here's what he really looked like. I'm not making this stuff up. Let's start with this kind of the serious aspect for it before we get into the fun stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It just struck me that we forgot to give the address to this webcomic. And if our listeners want to go and check out what we're trying to describe on Mike, then they should go to zco.mx/Roger Langridge, ROGERLANGRIDGE / The Great McGonagall, and then McGonagall is McGonagall. That's all one URL. So that's kind of a long one.
Yeah, and I would also be careful with that too, because there's some capitalization that I think might be important. And I half wonder if the easier route for anybody who's looking for this is to go to the zco.mx, and that'll give you the homepage of all these other comics, and then just search for Roger Langridge off of that would probably be the quickest way to get to it.
Yeah. Actually, I just did I checked on zco.mx/Roger Langridge without any capitals, and it still got me to Roger Langridge's page. So,
okay.
So yeah, you can find this webcomic there. Don't go to his, I guess, regular website, which is hotelfred.com.
Although I think he did put a link to the Great McGonagall from there, but it's you kind of bumping through a couple of different sites to get to it.
Oh, okay.
And obviously you have to dig for the link a little bit there too.
Yep. But definitely check this out. Like I said, we're only about 14 pages in, and now when is this updated? Because I don't think there's anything on the website that indicates the frequency or when they're usually the schedule?
Yeah, I've been following this through the feed, the RSS feed, and it's been coming out on a regular basis every week. I think on Sundays, if I recall correctly. So one page per week. There was an initial installment of like 7 or 8 pages or something, and then one page a week since then. I don't know how long it will run though. It looks pretty clearly not done at this point. We definitely have it kind of leaves. The last installment leaves a lot open yet, right. So I think we've got plenty more to go with this. But I don't know if this is something Langridge is going to continue for another month or another 6 months or another 6 years. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to see on that. There's definitely plenty of material to work with. That's right.
But yeah, people can check it out now. Basically, get it on the ground floor.
Yeah, great time to see it. And because it's Roger Langridge too, I don't think this should be a hard sell. You know, if you like Roger Langridge's stuff in any capacity, you're going to enjoy this.
Yeah, great to look at. Well, let's move on to the second webcomic that we're looking at this month, one that is significantly longer than The Great McGonagall, and this is Sufficiently Remarkable, and this is written and drawn by Maki Naro.
Yeah.
And you can find it at, don't forget the URL.
Yeah, let's not forget that. Yeah.
At sufficientlyremarkable.com. And that's one word. So sufficientlyremarkable.com. And this webcomic has been going on since October of 2013.
Yeah, this one's definitely got a longer life to it. But it's a little more in the dramatic vein, I'd say. So there's more of a slower build to this one. It's not moving quite as sprightly as Langridge's McGonagall is.
Now, okay, that's interesting because you say this works more in the dramatic vein, and I see where you're going with that. But in many ways, I think the comedy in Sufficiently Remarkable at times, and I think mostly, outshines the drama.
Oh yeah, it's definitely. I would not classify it as a drama per se. It's definitely more in a comedic vein, but not in quite the overt comedic vein that McGonagall is, right? And kind of discussing the two of those back to back like we are, I would definitely put McGonagall as more an outright comedy compared to Sufficiently Remarkable, which does have some dramatic elements to it. Mm-hmm.
Now, how would you describe Sufficiently Remarkable to the uninitiated?
That is a tough one. And I think I would do the same thing when I suggested that we cover it for our show. When I sent it to you, is I would just read their Naro's about page on this. And basically says, Sufficiently Remarkable follows the lives of 4 young adults and a host of supporting characters who discover the hard way that you're always coming of age. Living in Brooklyn, New York during uncertain times, they'll try to carve out a place for themselves in life, not realizing their actions all ripple against one another. Mm. It's kind of I found it's kind of a hard strip to kind of quantify. Mm-hmm. There's an element of the kind of slice of life feature to it, but it's not quite a slice of life story either, right? There's some dramatic elements. There's a kind of a higher comedic element to it than your typical slice of life story. So there is this, there's this element of these, like it said, the 4 young adults trying to discover their coming of age story or whatever. But there's something else to that, and I haven't been able to quite put my finger on how to describe that, quite frankly.
Yeah, the way that I would describe it, and the way I guess I am going to describe it because we're kind of setting this up now. The way I read Sufficiently Remarkable is that, in addition to the description that you've read from the About page, the thing that defines this webcomic for me is, I guess, a tension that I noticed working throughout. And that is, on the one hand, the webcomic wanting to, at least seemingly wanting to be, a series of more realistically based, you said slice of life, stories that are, I think, dramatic with a small d. Okay. So not necessarily, dramatic with, in any tragedy, in sense of tragedy or the tragic, but, or the dark or the hard biting. But dramatic along with those kind of comedic elements that make up everyday life. In other words, not outrageously comedic, although comedy every now and again fits into the lives of these characters. And so on the one hand, this webcomic seems to want to be the ongoing story of what's going on in these characters' lives. At the same time, there seems to be a pull in Sufficiently Remarkable that it seems to me to be kind of a gag strip at times. There are a number of installments where we will get one of these done-in-one gags that are obviously humorous in nature that may or may not have anything to do with the storyline that's currently ongoing. And there were enough of these, what I will call the gag strip parts of Sufficiently Remarkable, to make me wonder, does the creator want this to be a more dramatic, again with a small d, ongoing story based in reality of these characters' lives, or is he more interested in doing these done-in-one gags that sometimes strung together may have the appearance of a more realistically based storyline?
Yeah, that's that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. I had always read the kind of gag strip type installments when they come up. I've tended to read those in the context of the story that was kind of already ongoing. Mm-hmm. There was a sequence not that long ago where Meg had locked herself onto the roof of her apartment building and couldn't get down. And there were, as she's trying to figure out and cycle through different ideas on how to get down, there was, some comedic beats in there, right? She's I found a towel up, an old towel on the roof. I'll tie it to the antenna and I'll climb down like MacGyver or something. And turns out the towel's only a foot long, so she doesn't help already. And, that kind of thing. So I always read those comedic parts in the context of the overall story. I guess I was looking at it as here's a dramatic story, lowercase d, dramatic story of these characters. And then it has these comedic elements that crop up just to kind of keep you entertained as you go along.
Yeah, I can see that. Now, you mentioned a character, Meg, and the series of strips where she was stuck on her roof. Let's give a breakdown of the main characters of Sufficiently Remarkable. Now, the main character, the protagonist, is a young woman by the name of Riti, and I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name, but the pronunciation of her last name is an ongoing joke in this. Is it Mirabile?
I'm good with that if you are.
Yeah, because every now and again in this webcomic, when someone calls her by her last name, she always corrects them. But because it's a webcomic and not an audio medium, there's no indication of how we should pronounce it correctly or how people are pronouncing it incorrectly. So that's why I wasn't sure of the pronunciation of her last name. But right. Riti is the protagonist. Her roommate, Meg Ramsey, is whom you were referring to a moment ago. And I think the vast majority of Sufficiently Remarkable is devoted to their relationship as friends and roommates.
Right.
Friends first and then roommates second. And the roommate situation is where the complication comes into play for at least a good bit of the story that we have so far.
Yeah.
But there are other characters who also have fairly prominent roles. Now, at the very beginning, we get to see a very young Riti with her father, whose name is Rama. And one or two times after that, he appears again, but these are flashback moments. We also get to see quite a bit of Riti's boss, whose name is Will. And Ritti is a relatively recent college graduate, and she studied art. She wants to be an artist. She moved to New York to live, not only to live with her friend Meg, but also to make it in the art world, right? Because where do you go if you want to be an artist? You go to a place like New York City, where art is so central. But of course, she can't get a job with her art. And so what does she do? The next best thing she thinks that she's able to do, which is get a job in retail at an art supply store. And so Will is her boss. And a lot of the back and forth of this webcomic is also between Ritti and her boss, Will. But there are other characters as well. They're much less prominent. But the main ones I would say are Ritti, Meg, and Will. I mean, other characters come up, for instance, Ritti's friend, Hafiz. And there's a lot of potential with Hafiz, in that Hafiz's father, Amir, owns a deli in her neighborhood, and Amir, the father, is trying to get Ritti set up with his son, Hafiz. Hafiz, though, although a friend of Ritti's, is gay. And apparently that's something that the father cannot recognize. And so Ritti and Hafiz play along with this ruse, with the father. It's like, yeah, we'll go out. But, nothing ever comes of that. And it strikes me that there's a lot of potential there that at least I hope that the creator, Naro, will explore later.
Yeah, and that's that's kind of where I started too. Is it's more of this comic has kind of that slow build to it, right? We haven't seen too much of that yet, but there's certainly a lot that he can get into it. Most of the I guess focus has been, I would say, between Ritti and Meg, mm-hmm. and their relationship. And even though like his about page says that there's these 4 characters, we've really been only focusing on the 2. And interestingly, as you're sitting here talking, it dawned on me of something of a parallel. It doesn't quite work 100%, but there's almost kind of an odd couple thing going on here
between Ritti and Meg.
Between Ritti and Meg, yeah, exactly. And I'm thinking more the original production, not the television show that came later, where they're certainly not as well established as the odd couple were in terms of where they were in their lives, right? We're talking about early 20-somethings here. They're trying to find a job. That's very different than being the sports writer who's been working for
Ritti's trying to find a job. Meg is just sitting around.
Meg is sitting around, right? But that's a very different experience than having, a character who's a sports writer and has been working for the same newspaper for 20 years, right?
Right.
But it's kind of like almost a young version of the Odd Couple in that sense, right? It was with Meg being the layabout and a bit of a slob and doesn't really care about appearances, and Ritti trying to do the right thing and trying to be a good character and be a good person and that, but still just hasn't quite figured out herself yet, much less anything else, right? So it's not quite as overtly comedic, I don't think, as The Odd Couple was. Certainly less so than the television show became. But it still has some of that element to it, the kind of oil and water trying to get along, and they seem to, despite their differences.
Right, exactly. And that's where the vast majority of this webcomic, as we've mentioned, has really taken place, and that is the relationship between Ritti and Meg and them being kind of an unlikely pair. And that's fine, and that's where I think the vast majority of the comedy of Sufficiently Remarkable really comes out. So, what we were talking about in terms of the gag element, I think, is embedded in this comedic relationship between Ritti and Meg to a large degree. Although for me, Sufficiently Remarkable really shines, or I like it most when there is a more serious edge to the story that's being told. And we don't see that often, though, unfortunately. We do get to see it in those moments that tell us something about who Riti actually is, including the flashback segments with her father, which I think, and this is how the webcomic begins, and maybe that's why I'm predisposed to that, because that's what I thought it was when I first took a look at this several weeks ago. I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be this kind of webcomic. And then it turned into something a little different from what I was expecting. But every now and again, it comes back to that serious, if times maybe even pensive side, especially as it relates to Riti's life. And that's where I think that this webcomic really takes off. When it's that kind of gag strip type of webcomic, it didn't work as well for me. I mean, I could enjoy it, but not truly appreciate it.
Yeah, and as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I wonder if that's an instance where Naro is working as a creator and just comes up against basically what amounts to writer's block, right? He kind of like, okay, I need to get another installment out. I don't know where I want to take this yet, or I don't know how to take it to the next part. Let me just do a quick gag strip kind of thing, right? So, okay, I've got Meg stuck up on a roof. What's she going to do? Okay, well, that's a quick, easy one here. I can just have her screwing around with this, that, or the other thing or something. And I wonder if that is an instance of, just trying to work creatively within the bounds of whatever limitations you have as a creator, whether that's, I have no idea what else Naro is doing, if he's got a regular day job, or if that's just, like I said, writer's block or something like that, but he's still finding a way to get some installment out there, even if it's not quite if it's not quite the way he wants to advance the story per se,
Right. Yeah. Well, in this gets to, possibly at least a defining characteristic of webcomics and what webcomic creators have to go through that other comics creators may not have to worry about, at least in the same way, is that when it comes to a webcomic, scheduling becomes, I think, a more immediate concern. I mean, everybody has a schedule, everybody has deadlines, and everyone fights against those deadlines. But with a webcomic, if you say that your updates go up every Monday and every Friday, as we find on the main page of Sufficiently Remarkable, then you have committed yourself to a page on Monday and a page on Friday. Now, you and I have discussed enough webcomics to know that even if people say that it's updated every Tuesday or 3 times a week, many times it's not. And it's understandable. These things happen. Life happens. Right. But it just seems to me that there's more pressure there for webcomic creators if they set their schedule and they advertise it for everyone to see. And people, once they start reading, come to expect installments on that kind of schedule. And so, maybe a creator could have writer's block, and then along with that, they just need to get something up by the deadline, right? And so a gag strip may be a quick, easy way of getting something up, which is not the same kind of scheduling concern that other kind of creators who are not working on webcomics really don't have to concern themselves with, at least in the same way.
Right, because typically those other creators, if you're working in some other medium, you're looking at the larger picture. So you still have a deadline, but it's not for any single installment, for any single page. It's for 20 pages,
right,
or whatever. So okay, yeah, I can kind of skip today if I'm not having a good day or not thinking creatively today. I'll just do twice as much tomorrow, and they can do that. They run in creative spurts and whatever. But if you've kind of got this regular, almost daily beat of trying to get your comic up, you have to do something.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a bit about, I guess, the layout, the design of this webcomic. I found that Naro makes it, pretty easy to find things for the most part on his webcomic. So, he has a main menu up toward the top of the page where you can go to the home page. You can look just at the comics. There's an archive section. There's an easy to find gallery and cast list. There's even a store and an about page. And a blog that he maintains. In fact, the blog was updated back on February 24th, so this is a fairly ongoing thing. everything that he keeps up with. The one thing about the site's design and layout that struck me as at least a little problematic is the archives. So when you click on the archives, you get a list of the various chapters that he has created so far. Although it seems to me, reading through all of it, that there's more than just 6 chapters. And maybe he hasn't updated that page yet. I'm not sure. But if you go to one of the chapters, so for instance, I'm clicking on chapter 2, which is titled Grouping, then you get apparently a link to a number of pages within that chapter. And okay, I'm looking at this now, and all of those work. What was it? The other day I was looking at this on a tablet, and I was, now this is interesting. I'm looking at this now on my desktop as we're recording this, and I can go to each of these pages within the chapter, click on the page, and it takes me there. I swear to you, the other day when I was looking at this on my iPad, and was using the tap screen to get through things, I could not for the life of me get to many of these pages within the chapters from the archive. And I thought
Really?
I thought that may have been a flaw. And I kept refreshing the page. Now, it could have been something just specific to my iPad. I don't know, but I was having a problem doing that. But as I'm talking now, everything seems to be working just fine. Okay.
You know what? It's entirely possible too that, that was something, there was some technical problem with it. And, one of Naro's regular readers said, "Hey, I'm having trouble. Can you fix this?" And he went in and fixed it. That's entirely possible.
Yeah.
So that's one of the interesting things about just working on the web in general is that those updates can come and go literally on a day-to-day basis, right?
Yeah.
So something that you may have seen as a problem even 2 days ago could have been fixed in the subsequent day.
Right. And, and at the same time, I may, after we finish recording, go back to my iPad and see the exact same problems. And it could be that the theme that he's using here has some maybe even relatively minor glitch to it, where it isn't as responsive as, because I'm assuming that this is some kind of responsive theme, but it may not be as responsive as he would like. In other words, it may not accommodate every kind of viewing option that's out there.
Yeah. And that goes to one of the challenges, I think, a lot of webcomicers, I don't know if they actively acknowledge this or not, or if they think about it much all the time, but it's a challenge that's out there, is that they've got essentially 3 very distinct types of devices that people are viewing these on, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to have some contingent of people looking at these on a desktop. You've got to have some contingent of people looking at these on a tablet, and have some contingent of people looking at these on their phone. Mm-hmm. And those all have very different capabilities. I mean, they're all computers. They're still all accessing the internet. That all sounds pretty much the same, but the browsers are designed differently. The screen sizes are different ratio aspects. They act differently when you're using a touch screen versus a mouse. What works for one doesn't always translate to the other, and in fact, a lot of times does not translate at all. Right? There's a lot of comics that I will only read on my phone, and there's a lot of comics that I will only read on a desktop, or whatever, just because those formats don't always translate one way or to another. And that may well have been something you ran into as well. It's just, like you said, this may not be as responsive as he would like, and it just doesn't work on tablets as well for some reason.
Right. So what, how did you discover Sufficiently Remarkable? Because you recommended it to me.
Yeah, that's right. I actually have been following Naro for a couple of years now, just as a creator. Mm-hmm. He appeared on the PvP's Strip Search reality show back in, when was that, 2013 maybe, something like that?
You've mentioned that before.
Well, yeah, I went back in our archives. We actually reviewed back in October The Last Halloween by Abby Howard.
Oh, okay, that's right.
And she was another contestant on that show. And both Howard and Naro did phenomenally well. And they were like the last 3 people standing or something like that, last 3 or 4. But they both did. Both Abby Howard and Maki Naro did very well on that show. And I liked what I saw that he was presenting within the show. So I think when the show ended or as it was ending, I was like, okay, let me follow him. I think he's going to be doing something interesting. And I think I started following him on Twitter. And then a year or two later, he started this comic. And I was able to pretty much pick up from the jump because of that.
Yeah. In fact, I see now that he does have a link to a page that gives that background, to strip search.
Yeah.
That you just mentioned. So he has that. Yeah. So, and he's also, I see he's done work for the Nib in the past.
Yeah. I think I've seen a few of his pieces there as well.
Yes. A work called Vaccines Work. And if people want to find out more about Maki Naro, they can also visit his Patreon page, which there is a link to. So it's at patreon.com/Maki, Maki.
And I should point out too, actually, I'd almost forgotten about this before he worked on this. I think it was between his strip search and this, he had another webcomic that was, I can't remember the name of it offhand, and I don't see it mentioned on his site, but it was a science-based site. He's actually got training in, I think chemistry, if I remember right, chemistry or biology, something like that. And he did these science-based comics, and they were all kind of little one-offs here and there based on whatever interesting tidbit of science that he thought was, just thought was not well known or was kind of curious or whatever. And had a lot of interesting stuff on it. And I like the fact that they were all science-based, but he was still able to find humor in the science. There's one in particular I remember. He was commenting on a study that somebody else had done on whether or not cats actually responded to their names. Like if you say, "Hey, come here, Fluffy," does the cat actually recognize that Fluffy is her name? And the study basically found that most cats do recognize their names, like 75% do recognize their names, and they're more responsive if it's spoken by a person that they know, like somebody who normally takes care of them or whatever. And he's kind of going through this, but then ends it by saying, "But here's what I really took out from this. It's not that 75% of cats recognize their names. It's 25% of cats don't give a fuck about you." And I just like that he's got this, he's going through all the science-based thing and then puts this weird spin on it that's just, you don't expect, but still 100% fits with the data that he was talking about. But yeah, he did that for a while before he launched Sufficiently Remarkable, and then when Sufficiently Remarkable came about, I started following that as well.
Okay. Well, who he should get in touch with are the editors over at First Second, especially those who were working on their science comic series.
Oh, yes, that would be a good idea.
And who knows? For all we know, there may be something in the works with him in First Second. We just don't know about it.
That's entirely possible as well. Yes.
Well, Sean, as we have been doing over the past several months, we're using a portion of our month's webcomic show to talk with the creators behind a new webcomic, Poe and the Mysteriads, Paul Schultz and Jim McLean. Now, this month, we talk with Jim, but unfortunately, we couldn't coordinate a common time with Paul.
Yeah, it's the challenge of doing a multiple person podcast, right? Is getting everybody on the same page for even 10 minutes is sometimes difficult.
Right. But Jim does speak for Paul this month, and he has a lot to tell us. So let's go ahead and check in with Jim McLean.
And we are here once again with Jim McLean to talk about Poe and the Mysteriads. We don't have Paul Schultz, the artist, this time as we normally do, but we're just going to get some updates here and talk with Jim specifically about what some of the creative stuff that have gone into the comic and some of the places that he's taken. We're a little ways into it now, so let's see where. Let's start off, Jim, with what has been going on since the last time we talked to you on the comic.
Okay, well, let's see. Has it been about a month now? So we've had
yes,
4 more episodes. And I think that was week. I'm trying to remember now. Is it week 7 that we just put up? Seems like it was. I might actually have to look. I don't keep track of what week number it is.
It's 4 more than whatever it was last time.
Exactly.
You say that
Exactly. So I think it's week 7, and now we're starting to get into a flashback. We had Poe going into the medical examiner's office, identifying the body of her former partner, and they had a little exchange between her and this detective character that we introduced, and the coroner kind of gets a little bit miffed with them having a little infighting and argument, and basically kicks them out and threatens to take a belt to her. And this week, all of a sudden, we go into a flashback because she was an abused child. So it makes it a little bit tense, let's say. So we're going to be into a flashback for a good couple of weeks coming up, where she's flashing back to how she became Poe and the partner of Corvus.
And you were saying before we started the call too that there's actually some personal history there, I guess. And did you want to get into that a little bit on why that's why you felt that was an important part of this? Because I know this started off initially as like a STEM based comic, but then it's certainly adding a new dimension to that.
And this was always a part of the plan. The whole mission, everybody says, "Oh, I have a good Batman story." Everybody has a good Batman story to tell, and so this one starts off, and you think, "Oh yeah, well we get this. She's Robin. He's Corvus is Batman, and that kind of thing." And the big difference is the mission. Corvus's mission is not just to go out and beat up the rogues gallery, the freak of the week, so to speak. His mission is to save abused children, and it turns out in this episode right here that Poe is one of those abused children, and he stops her from getting beaten with a belt. So we're getting pretty heavy here, but this was always part of the plan because Paul and I talked about this, and every story is better when it's personal, and this one's very personal to me. I was an abused child. My parents divorced when I was 6, and my stepfather, the guy that my mother eventually went to live with, beat me every day for 5 years. So this is a very personal story for me. And so it, I think, adds a little bit of, it's kind of a darker element, I suppose, but, it reaches a lot of people. There's still a lot of kids out there today who are being abused. I mean, we have roof sits, we have awareness programs and things like that. But if the kids are in a situation like I was in, I was basically threatened with worse if I ever told anybody. And so this is sort of like a go back in time sort of fantasy idea that there would have been somebody out there going around saving kids from this fate. And so I think it adds a little bit of a personal touch, and it adds a twist that's definitely just different than Batman, whose motivation is vengeance.
So we're going to be in this 12-year flashback for maybe another couple of weeks, another couple of installments.
Well, we're gonna let's see. Next week you get to see the result of Corvus turning his junior partner, his current junior partner, Red Raven, loose on this abuser. We're gonna get a nice little fight scene coming up, and then we're going to have a montage where we see how Poe fits into their dynamic, and then eventually replaces Red Raven as Corvus's partner. So yeah, it's going to advance from the 12 years ago fairly quickly, but the one that appears tomorrow takes place seconds after the scene right here.
Now then here's another question that it's a little loaded, I think. But one of the obviously, child abuse is not a completely untouched subject within comics, right? It has come up before in various capacities, whatever. And a lot of writers, I don't know a lot, but at least some writers have used it as kind of a simplistic hook for the sensationalist aspect of it. And then, after 6 months or something, it gets totally dropped and never mentioned again, or very rarely mentioned or something, or worse yet, it's mentioned, but there's no real ramifications for the character. My suspicion is, since you actually live this, that's not going to be the case here. But
it's the core motivation of the main character.
Yeah. So I'm curious for you if you might expand a little bit on building that into the storyline and into the characterization specifically, not necessarily the original event, but kind of the emotional fallout and the psychological fallout afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just expand on what you just said. One of my favorite strips was when Peter David was writing the Hulk, and it was revealed that Bruce Banner was an abused child. I think he actually used that really, really well at that time. It explained a lot of the rage behind it, and some of those elements made it into the movie, and I thought that was kind of nice to see. So it's not always a throwaway idea. That one stuck around for a good long time. That one really had some traction.
Yep.
But without giving too much away, and this is stuff that's not completely written yet, but how Poe, it's called Poe and the Mysteriads. We haven't seen a Mysteriad yet. So you're probably wondering, well, what the heck are the Mysteriads? Well, the Mysteriads are essentially her agents, like the Shadow has agents, and those agents come from people that she and Corvus rescued. So this flashback also is going to entail the rescue of some of the people that then she later, as an adult, is going to recruit to help her, in solving the mystery and then continuing Corvus's crusade to help abused children. So it's going to be a network, essentially, of abused children helping abused children, which is something I think would be great. It refocuses, it gives them something to fight for, so that we're not just talking about your typical, revenge fantasy situation. There's a laudable goal. But, in saying that, there is still a rogues gallery that you're going to see in the montage, and there's still some pretty freaky villains that are kind of fun and cool. So it's not going to be completely dark and deep. We're still remembering that it's a comic book and it's supposed to be fun. So we'll have that element in there too.
Yeah, I was going to say that's almost mandatory, really.
Yeah.
So tell us how the Facebook format is continuing to go, because as you mentioned to us, I think last month and the month before that, your original plan was to have a dedicated website set up for the webcomic. That you weren't able to get done in time, and so you wanted to use Facebook. And so now it's still based on that. Are you finding that this may be a direction where you want to leave it?
Yeah, no way. We are definitely going to put together a WordPress comic theme, and we'll put it back up on a regular website like I was going to. It's just a matter of finding the time to get that done. So yeah, Facebook is great and everything, but it's like I can monitor what's happening. I can see how many people are seeing the comic each week, and the reach is growing less and less each week by a lot. I mean, I think the first week I paid for a $20 ad or something like that. We had 800 views, something like that. I think this week we had 50. It's pathetic. So yeah, we're not gonna depend on Facebook's algorithms to get the word out. That's just not going to work.
And I know one of the things you'd mentioned earlier too was that you were part of your, I guess, marketing plan, for lack of a better term. It was that you'd be bringing it up. You're going to be doing conventions and panels throughout the year, talking about this and your other projects. And I think if I recall seeing things correctly, you've already hit a couple of the smaller conventions already, right? And have those gone well with regard to promoting Poe, or have have you been focusing on Solution Squad and some of your other things?
Well, I have the printouts of all the chapters of Poe right out on the table, and one of the things is, it's like, without going too much into Solution Squad, it's a comic based on math, and that's a tough sell as it is, and especially at comic book conventions. So I thought of this couple days ago, and it was funny because Paul's not here to defend himself, but I'm gonna tell it anyway. I said, this doesn't have to be about STEM, and he goes, "Thank goodness! I was wondering when you'd come to your senses." So it's like, all of a sudden I realized it's like getting up on Sunday morning and launching that week's comic. It was like, this is actually fun. I don't have to think about math. I don't have to, worry about how to incorporate this in any kind of curriculum or anything. It's like, this can be just a straight up adventure. And so having it on my table in the last couple of weeks, I did the Michigan State University Comics Forum. And then I did a little library show in Barrington that Sean didn't come see me at. Thanks, Sean.
No big deal. I just happened to be in the city anyway and just couldn't make it. Not a problem.
It's okay. I was just teasing you. Having that out there, people give me that look I always get. It's like, ew, math. And it occurred to me, it's like, I have something that's not math. It's like, oh, if you don't like that, how about this? And so it's going to provide something that I can put out there that they say, oh, well, this looks really cool. And so even if the math is somewhat alienating to people with my main project, this one actually still has a place near and dear to my heart for personal reasons. And it actually grabbed a bunch of people. A bunch of people looked at this and said, who's Paul Schultz and where's he been? And I said, I'm right there with you. We need to see more from him. So they got to look at his artwork and they said, this is very noir. I go, perfect. You understand the terminology and you get the whole thing. So I'm very encouraged by that. And I'll be especially encouraged at Indiana Comic-Con and C2E2 coming up in April, because I get to talk to, a couple hundred people at a time, and I'll be sure to at least put, a couple pages up there and go, hey, look at this. So that will get the word out.
Now, is there any concern of yours, like from a creative perspective? Like you were just saying, like with Solution Squad, a lot of people see the STEM portion and say, oh God, math, I don't want to deal with that.
Exactly.
With Mysteriads here, and as we talked about just a minute ago, there is this heavy child abuse element to it. Mm-hmm. Is there any concern at creatively speaking, that it just gets to be, very preachy and kind of turn offy in a way? And,
no.
Is just Jim standing up on his soapbox going, oh, you should be nice to kids, or something simplistic.
Because that moral lesson is fairly clear to most people. And I think even though it's the main motivation of the characters, it's not what they're going to be doing all the time. And in essence, it's a murder mystery. And so that's what we're really going to be looking at. We're not going to be delving into specific kinds of abuse, and we're not going to be watching kids get beaten or anything like that. That I'm not willing to put in the comic. But them preventing it from happening is a good thing, I think. But no, I'm not going to get all preachy about it. It's like, I think pretty much everybody knows it's wrong. Even the people who are doing it know that it's wrong. So I don't see the point in beating that dead horse, so to speak.
And again, for our listeners, if they want to check out the progress of Poe and the Mysteriads, it's easy to find. And if they go to www.mysteriads.com, and that's spelled MYSTERIADS. And if they type that into their browser, right now they'll automatically be taken to your Facebook page.
Yep. And hopefully, it's like I'm on spring break in about 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, I should have the time to sit down and throw together a WordPress site for it. So, once again, Paul and I are not worried about the, instant success or anything like that, because seriously, it's like we split the work equally, and it's not that time intensive. We really just enjoy doing it, and we really enjoy working together. Once again, he's not here to back me up on that, but I every time we talk, it's like we go, man, we should have been doing this years ago. So we really just enjoy doing it, and it will eventually pick up steam. And it's kind of funny because with webcomics, you never know, from week to week what's going to happen. But when you then get 7, 8, or 9 or 10 episodes in a row where the story starts to build, that's when you really want to draw attention to it. I mean, honestly, every webcomic I've ever read starts off kind of slow. So I would personally rather wait until week 10, 11, or 12 to see what's going on and start to get a sense of what the story is going to be like. I don't know about you guys. Is that how you feel?
I guess it all depends.
Yeah, I think it boils down to what type of comic you're trying to put together. I think it makes more sense, certainly in something like the Mysteriads with the murder mystery, heavy noir kind of situation. But yeah, I think there's certainly ways you can do I've got my one comic and it's just so cool that I want to come back next week. But it really has to be the right type of comic, I think. I don't think it works for everybody.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what kind of changes and progress you've made in the next month when we chat back with you and we hope Paul this time again.
Yeah. And hopefully by the next time we'll have the WordPress site together. Mysteriads.com will still go right to there. So, it'll be wherever the home of it is that the website directs to.
We'll hold your feet to that, Jim.
Yeah.
Don't do that. I'm still putting together the last of my other books, so that's taking the majority of my time. Yeah. And Paul understands that.
Yeah. Well, keep up the good work.
Hey, let me ask, are you guys liking it?
Oh, yeah. Well,
so far, yeah.
We had gotten to see I guess in essence, the first 2 months about that, maybe a month and a half, because you guys already had the art available and shared it with us. So yeah, we have already seen most of what's already up.
Yeah, I think we're just now starting to get to the stuff that you hadn't shared with us previously.
That's right.
Right.
What you described this month.
Yeah.
Yeah, and tomorrow we get to actually see some real martial arts too. Oh, I should have added that when we were. Well, I can now. We're still talking. I took Okinawa Shorin-ryu karate when I lived in Michigan City, closer to where Paul lives, and this is years ago, like over 20. And I took Okinawa Shorin-ryu karate for 2.5 years, and I got up to a brown belt level. So I actually threw in some real martial arts into the next little fight scene that's going to debut tomorrow morning. So it's kind of fun. Paul's going like, "What are you doing here? What is this?" And I had to explain what exactly it was. And he goes, "Oh, that's kind of cool." So
nice.
So the martial arts that you see in here will be authentic because it's going to be the stuff that I know how to do. So
very good. All right.
Well, we'll talk to you next month, Jim.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, thanks for that update, Jim. That was really insightful stuff. Looking forward to seeing you next month, and hopefully we'll actually be able to see an honest to goodness website here and actually in production. So
yeah,
looking forward to that.
Yeah, and also looking forward to seeing how this most recent dramatic turn in the story, where that leads.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's take a look at the already completed webcomic that we're discussing for this month. And this one is the Boston Metaphysical Society. This is written by Madeline Holly Rosin and with art by Emily Hugh. And I guess I'm pronouncing that correctly. The last name is H-U. So I don't know if it's Who or Hugh. But they're the writer and the artist behind it. And this webcomic can be found at Boston Metaphysical Society, .com. And this has run from April of 2013 to July of last year. Although, now we're reading this as an already completed webcomic, but if we look at the last pages of what would you consider the final chapter 6, there is some indication that there is more to come, because the very last page of chapter 6, we get in the last panel, it says end of series 1. So there may be a series 2. We don't know. It hasn't been updated since July of last year, But even if this is all of the Boston Metaphysical Society that we ever get, it is a complete story, and it works as a completed webcomic, I think.
Absolutely. And I think this is probably the direction I'm surprised more creators don't take, is she's kind of developed this as, is like you were saying, basically a standalone story, but within the larger context of this kind of broader universe. And, so she can go off in other directions after this without having to, without being necessarily tied to everybody having read the first installment or the first section, series, I guess she's calling it. Kind of like different seasons of a television show. I've seen a lot of, Marvel and DC are doing a lot of that type of thing these days too, where they're having, even to the point of rebooting a series entirely, even if it's something as common as Spider-Man or Batman or something like that.
Marvel reboots at the drop of a hat. Any excuse to get a new number one, they'll take. And that's part of the money-grubbing nature of Marvel, at least in my book. Other people may see it differently, but I digress.
Yeah, but I mean, there is validity in that, right? If you look at the numbers, they do spike on the number ones, and it does act as a launching point for people who might not want to collect the 500 some issues that came before. So I think from a business standpoint, I think that makes sense, certainly. And I can see why an independent creator would want to pick up on that as well. I think it makes sense there too, because, if you come across Boston Metaphysical Society at a comic book convention, and either Hugh or Holly Rising is sitting at a table selling them, you don't want to be stuck trying to pick up one but not the other because they ran out of the first series or something like that.
And there is a book that apparently you can buy from the website if you go there and click on that link. But let's talk a little bit about what Boston Metaphysical Society is all about. The protagonist in this webcomic, or one of the protagonists, is a former Pinkerton detective, Samuel Hunter. And when the webcomic begins, we find him. He's as the title suggests, he does investigation into metaphysical matters, dealing with spirits, ghosts, and things of that sort. And as we have in this story, things from another dimension, whatever we choose to call them. And when this webcomic begins, Hunter is on an investigation with a partner of his, the father of another main character of the story, Caitlin O'Sullivan. So Caitlin's father is a photographer who works with Hunter, and he's killed in the line of duty. And so there's a bit of mourning at the very beginning, and then Caitlin comes to Hunter, and she has a keen interest in the kind of things that her father did, even though her mother didn't like that. And so Caitlin asks Hunter if she could be the new photographer, and Hunter resists for a while. He doesn't want to get a young girl involved in things, but because of Caitlin's persistence and her, apt handling of matters, he ends up taking her on as a partner, as an investigative partner. But another partner of Hunter's is an African-American scientist by the name of Granville Woods. And much of what goes on in this story is based on the specifics that I just mentioned. He's an African-American scientist. The other scientists, most of them that we see in this story, don't respect Granville or don't respect Woods the way that they should because he's African American, and this is taking place in the early 20th century.
Yeah, it's definitely got it's got a steampunk aesthetic, right? So we've still got that kind of Victorian society type of thing going on, but then trying to pull in some of those social context for that, right? We've got, like you said, Granville Woods. As an African American, he's not really respected well, and neither is the girl, Caitlin O'Sullivan. She's
right.
not only a female, which is looked down upon, but she's also Irish,
and working class. I mean, there's a lot of class-based commentary going on in this webcomic, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, and that's there's definitely an ongoing series or ongoing some plot, I guess, or theme for for the entire series is kind of how those classes play together, particularly against, we've mentioned the main characters, but then there's also a class of scientists that kind of represent, that kind of white aristocracy that was looking down on everybody. Interestingly, all these famous names that you already know, right? Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, Harry Houdini.
Right. And they make up an organization called BETH, which stands for Bell, Edison, Tesla, Houdini.
Right. And they're certainly working scientists and act generally pretty heroically, as you would expect, as they're drawn into this kind of story. They're not the main protagonists, though, which is one thing I like, right? I think it'd be easy to fall back on, oh, well, everybody knows Harry Houdini, so let's make him a hero. Or that kind of thing. But like I said, they kind of represent this white aristocracy, and they don't have quite the same respect for Woods, for O'Sullivan, even for Hunter at some level, because he was a detective, he was a Pinkerton detective, not a true scientist, right? Not a true upper class kind of blue blood type of character. So there is that kind of a little bit, not openly class warfare, but there is some classism definitely thrown in.
Right. Now, we were mentioning the historic scientist that, they aren't the main protagonists, but they do play a rather prominent role in this story. So we have two kind of organizations that kind of, in many ways, comes together in order to solve a larger mystery, right, of these interdimensional beings. So the Boston Metaphysical Society is made up of, the aforementioned Samuel Hunter, Granville Woods, and then Caitlin O'Sullivan. And then they hook up, so to speak, with Beth, Bell, Edison, Tesla, and Houdini. And so those four historical characters, they do play an important part. One of the things I really appreciate about this, the presence of these historical figures, is the fact that they allow a kind of steampunk aesthetic to come into play here. And, this is not the first time that we've seen, if not all of these characters, and at least some of these characters, these historical characters, used in comics and in a steampunk manner. I can't help but think of Matt Fraction's The Five Fists of Science, where we have, in fact, some of the exact same characters, right? Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison in particular. But, there are a lot of other comics where Edison, Tesla, Bell, and Houdini have been used. Now, another takeaway for me in terms of the use of these four historical characters, these scientists, these inventors, and these artists, right, like Harry Houdini, is that of the four, the one that comes out looking the least attractive is Tesla.
I was a little surprised by that.
Yes,
that caught me off guard.
Because every other time I've seen Nikola Tesla in a comic represented in some form, whether historically accurate or otherwise, he is always seen as a very sympathetic character, someone that we should identify with. And if anyone is villainous, it's Thomas Edison. But here, even though the character Edison is not the most attractive, at least he's someone who you could, for all practical purposes, call good, right? It's Tesla that is the very self-serving and self-obsessed character in the Boston Metaphysical Society.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting take on the character, because historically, Tesla was he was certainly very eccentric, but a lot of his eccentricities were still, at least as everything I've read, they were at least still in the service of mankind, right? So which is why he's ended up portrayed as a hero or a better character. Whereas Edison, his inventions and his everything that he did was kind of more in service to himself, right?
His ego, yeah.
His own ego, his own pocketbook. He wanted credit for the light bulb. He wanted credit for the phonograph. He wanted the money that kind of came and resulted from that. Whereas Tesla was, I want to give everybody free electricity. It's a very different kind of mindset. But the interesting spin on that Holly Rising takes is that Tesla was also very single-minded.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if he had a project he was working on, that was it. He didn't even, I've read stories that he would work on a project and forget to eat entirely, kind of thing, right? And that's kind of where the Tesla that we see here, he is so focused on getting this spirit or whatever
that they call the shifter.
They call the shifter, yeah. It's never entirely clear what exactly it is, but you know, he's so intent on getting rid of the shifter that he's willing to do whatever it takes and piss off everybody it takes and kill anybody that needs to be killed if they're getting in the way of him eliminating this threat.
Right. Yeah. Now, you know, we've talked kind of lightly about the, I guess, metaphysical premise of this story, you know, what makes it kind of otherworldly. And what we have going on here with the Boston Metaphysical Society is that this is a world, and this is where the steampunk element comes in, or partly where it comes in, where beings from another dimension can make it here to our dimension. You know, now you can call them ghosts, you can call them spirits, or whatever. But there's this, the way that it's described here is that there's another dimension, and these things, these beings, these entities from another dimension are coming into ours. And that's causing problem. But there's one in particular that seems to be causing quite a bit of chaos and even death. And this is the one that they name the shifter. And this is, a presence that they discover seems to be drawn to violence, right? So if something violent is going on, a gathering or a particular event in our world, then the shifter may be drawn to that kind of activity, to that kind of action. And the presence of the shifter seems to kind of enrage individuals and to pit humans one against the other. And in other words, kind of exacerbate the violence. And this is where issues of ethnicity and class come into play because, you know, there are parts of Boston that are poor, you know, the Irish sections at this time. And so whenever there seems to be a potential for a run-in between the poor and the police, this is where this shifter will show up. And more times than not, it is the poor, the Irish, who are killed either by the police or are killed maybe as a result of the shifter figure. And so the Irish in Boston feel that it's the police and the elite, the political and cultural elite, that's out to get them. And so anytime that there is some kind of clash with figures of authority, that brings the shifter who only exacerbates the problem. Now, where Nikola Tesla comes in, I mean, he understands that in order to get the shifter, he's going to have to create violent scenarios that can lure the shifter. He doesn't care, though. And so if people get killed, if people get hurt in the process, he is so single-minded, as you pointed out, then, you know, that's what the way it's got to be.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, I think that's an interesting take on the character, and one I've certainly not seen that before in comics, even though I've seen Tesla show up in any number of comics over the years. And, you know, it threw me a little bit at first, just because I'm used to seeing Tesla in this kind of more heroic light.
Right.
But my initial thought was, well, she's not playing. I mean, that's not the character who Tesla is. But then as I thought about it, I was like, okay, well, she's playing up a different aspect that we typically don't see. And then particularly when she pits him against Edison specifically, and shows that rivalry that they really did in fact have, and then kind of amplified that, made it even part of a plot point towards the end. You know, then you kind of see, yeah, there's not necessarily this kind of black and white hero and villain kind of situation with anybody really, right? Mm-hmm. Is everybody has these shades of gray. They're doing things that serve some purpose, but that might not be the same purpose that works for everybody.
Yeah. Although I do have to say, of all of the characters, especially the historical ones, the most attractive one, or the one who comes out looking the most human and the kindest, the most friendly and all that, is Harry Houdini.
Yeah. And that could be too, because he was of the four that we're talking about here, he was the most. He was the entertainer of the group.
Exactly.
Right? That was. He was just by profession. He was out there to entertain people. Right. So. I think that certainly fits, I think, within the context of the story here.
Right. But we don't see much of Alexander Graham Bell.
No, he did play kind of more of a minor role, relatively speaking. And honestly, I think that makes sense as well, from the standpoint that, yes, he was a brilliant inventor, but maybe not quite to the level of an Edison or a Tesla. Right. So that he plays kind of a second fiddle role in that, and within that group, I think makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I liked the story of Boston Metaphysical Society, and I guess for the most part, the art I thought really worked well. Also, although I do have to say that there were times in going through Hugh's art that it wasn't at times easy to distinguish one character from the other. In other words, there's sometimes, not every time, but there's some occasions where the way she drew the characters, it wasn't easy to distinguish one from the other. And not just within a particular page, but let's say in a particular string of pages. But you could, more or less get who was who from the context, if not the art.
Yeah, I think I think one of the challenges she has is there's very little among the characters that we're looking at. There's an easy way to physically distinguish them in the first place.
Right.
It's not like, with like a superhero, one of the reasons they wear tights is so you can always tell that it's Superman, regardless of how badly drawn his face is. Right. And you get a little bit of that, the Caitlin O'Sullivan character is always easy to pick out because she's the only woman standing around. The Granville Woods is always easy to pick out because he's the only black man standing around. There's another character, what's his name? Jonathan Weldsmore. Just basically some guy with a mustache. It's
who could be Tesla.
Yeah, I was going to say he from some angles he could easily look like Tesla, because he's some guy with a mustache. And it's really difficult, I think, in the first place to capture a real person's likeness, just in general, but then to do it consistently over, however many pages this is 6 chapters worth of story, to do that consistently is insanely challenging. I can't imagine even trying to do that. Yeah. So, I can see, I agree with you that does present a little bit of a problem, but I'm willing to forgive her a little bit in that sense, because I do understand that that's a huge challenge to undertake too.
Right. Now, getting back to the content of Boston Metaphysical Society, we were talking about the ambition of this webcomic, of only 6 chapters, in terms of race, the African-American Granville Woods, ethnicity, the Irish question, especially as it's embodied in Caitlin O'Sullivan, gender with Caitlin, and class, the working class, especially the Irish working class. But another thing that they bring us is a discussion on religious belief. We haven't mentioned yet, but Caitlin is a medium. And so not only does her being an Irish woman, working class, work against her or not in her favor, but she's also a medium, and she also runs up against trouble with her mother and her priest because she's a medium. And so religious intolerance is also injected into this, relatively short, completed webcomic. And so I think that it speaks to the writing ability of Holly Rossing that she's able to mix so much into this webcomic.
Yeah, that's one of the. I think that's one of the nice things about going back to this kind of Victorian era steampunk thing. I mean, there's certainly a danger of oversaturation just generally, right? The steampunk aesthetic has kind of, I don't know if it's been necessarily diluted, but it's easy. You can go to any comic book convention and find half a dozen cosplayers within the first 5 minutes, right, doing some kind of steampunk something or other. But it works well within the context of the story that she's trying to tell, like you said, because there's kind of all these built-in these built-in discrepancies among the different classes, right? Among the different races, among the different cultures, basically. You've got like you said, we talked about, there's the racial issue, the religious issues. All of that is kind of built in and baked into the setting itself. So if you go back to a Victorian steampunk setting, you throw in a black character and boom, you've got a lot to work with already. You throw in a female protagonist, another ton of stuff to work with. So I think that works well, particularly in, and not to get too political, but there's a lot of unrest right now in our culture in general. So it makes sense, I think, to reflect on that through the art, through the storytelling, in a way, and saying, look, these are the types of issues that they faced back in the day. And yeah, there's, the supernatural element, and we're throwing it's a fiction story, et cetera, but there's that kind of element of being able to connect with those issues that we have today in our culture too.
Right. Well, Sean, we looked at 3 very different, but each engaging in its own way webcomic. We started off with the very new webcomic from Roger Langridge, The Great McGonagall. After that, we looked at Maki Naro's Sufficiently Remarkable. And then we wrapped up with the completed webcomic Boston Metaphysical Society, written by Madeline Holly Rossing with art by Emily Hugh.
Yeah, a lot of different stuff this time. Sometimes we try and do kind of, at least I'm thinking in terms of some kind of theme. I don't think we really had a theme this time, but
no, just a nice mix.
Just a good mix of different things to look at.
Yeah. And if you want to find great comics like this, then you would do well to visit the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. That's dcbservice.com. But if you like your comics in digital format, then definitely check out their sister site, which is mydigitalcomics.com. So whether you like your comics in hard copy or digital format, you can't go wrong with those guys, our sponsor. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you thought about this month's webcomics episode. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Alternatively, we also have email addresses, which are fantastic. If you want to share a webcomic that you'd like us to check out, easier to throw in a web address and a link into an email than over the phone, certainly. So you can email us at 2guys@comicsalternative.com. That's TWOGUIS @comicsalternative.com. Or you can email me directly at Sean@comicsalternative.com.
Or you can email me directly at Derek@comicsalternative.com. You can find us all over social media such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
Always a ton of great ways to get in touch with us. I think we could do no more to make it easier for you.
That's right. So, why don't you guys listening to this episode do what Keith Ellis did in terms of his comments from last month's show where we discussed Chris Ware's The Last Saturday. Drop us an email or two or more and let us know what you think about the webcomics that we discussed for March.
We're looking forward to hearing from everybody.
Yeah, or recommend some that we may want to look at in April and May.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So until next month, I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and we'll see you next month.